in week 18, that just shows, I think, how good this team could have been and the potential that they had too. This is the same team that in the beginning of the season was top 5 in rushing and top 5 in passing with, it felt like, no running backs on the roster, right? All right, welcome into Flock Nation Speaks, a podcast for only the best, right, of Ravens fans. I'm still working on the slogan, okay? This is the pilot episode, all right? I'm still working on the slogan. I don't know if I want it to be an all-time great Ravens podcast. It kind of goes to my wrestling fandom, but or if I want it to be, that a podcast for only the best Ravens fans, and everybody else too. Anybody who wants to watch the Flock Nation speak can come watch the Flock Nation speak. Who am I? DJ from Beal Productions, looking at you, talking to you, speaking with you, commenting with you, whatever, right? What is this podcast? It is called Flock Nation Speaks because it's a Ravens podcast primarily, but I will say I'm going to throw in a couple of little tidbits about the Sixers and a little bit of basketball too every once in a while, simply because I do love basketball as well. And the Sixers, that's my squad, one of my passionate, my passionate fan bases that I'm a part of, including the Ravens. So in the pilot episode, I want to talk about the season in review. I know I'm a little bit late on this one, about 2 months. Did I really need that long to kind of, digest a little bit? No, not necessarily. But giving me a little bit more of an opportunity to sit down and think a little bit and think about the season. Here's some people. I've been in a couple of Twitter spaces where they talked about the season, and I got a chance to talk a little bit like off the record about the season, but now I finally get to put it, pen to paper, read the button. I don't know, whatever you call it, right? Whatever you call it. But I want to talk about the season in review. Of course, we got some other news as of late with Villanueva retiring. What do I think about that? Boykin potentially, probably should have put that in the graphic, but potentially being traded, and also Tavon Young being released and the end of his tenure as a Raven, because we've seen the ups and downs of Tavon Young, but we'll talk about that as well. And then speaking of the defense, right? Was the wrong coordinator fired in Greg Roman? Wink Martindale, of course, Wink was fired. Greg stayed, right? Gregory, we don't talk about G-Row, shout out to Engraven on that one. But for me, let's start with the season in review. A very hurtful season, I will say. Like Lamar Jackson's reaction on your screen, if you're watching, and if you're listening, I'm just going to let you know he's frustrated, okay? That was me. That was me throughout this season, right? I was a little frustrated. I'm not even going to lie to you. What a wild ride it was, though, I think is where we got to start, right? I mean, this season started out with news from the jump, right? Before the season even started, right? Injuries everywhere. I'm talking about before week 1, there was injuries everywhere. Your top 3 running backs, right? Out for the season. Like, not out for a couple of weeks, out for the season. So, like, you're a run-first offense, and your top 3 running backs are gone, right? That it starts off there. Then the defense gets hit. Derek Wolfe, he's done for the season. We didn't know it at the time, but he's done for the season, right? We saw he got hurt in that like training camp. He had got hurt. I think aggravated his back. I think it was, and that kept him out for the season. Marcus Peters goes down with the torn ACL, and then of course the rest is history as the injuries that just continue to pile up throughout the season. I'll say this, right? I'll say this. I've heard a lot of people try to compare the Ravens injury situation this season to other teams throughout the NFL. I mean, we've seen, the Titans. The Titans was the main one because the Titans, of course, made the playoffs. They were the number one seed. They didn't have Derrick Henry for what was it, half the season? Just about. They didn't have Derrick Henry for a nice bit of the season. AJ Brown was hurt. Julio Jones was hurt. But I'm gonna be honest with you. To me, you can't compare what the Ravens went through from an injury situation to any team this season. And for the Ravens to be still alive in week 17, crazy to think we had a week 18, right? In week 18, that just shows, I think, how good this team could have been and the potential that they had too. This is the same team that in the beginning of the season was top 5 in rushing and top 5 in passing with, it felt like, no running backs on the roster, right? The season was just crazy. There was injuries. And the reason I say you can't compare the injury situation, to be honest with you, to the Titans or to any other team in the NFL this season that at least had a chance of contending in any way or getting to the playoffs. The reason I say you can't really compare it is the Ravens were hit with injuries at every position group. And mostly significant injuries, except for wide receiver. Wide receiver was the only position group that wasn't hit by an injury that took somebody out for the year. Think about it. Running back, top 3 running backs out in a run first offense, no less, right? That hurts enough. Then of course you had Bateman hurt for the first part of the season. You had Boykin hurt for the first part of the season, right? You had those 2 guys who, Boykin wasn't really a big factor this season, but Bateman, of course, turned out to be, and hopefully going to turn out to be for the future as well. Tight end, of course, you had Nick Boyle, who struggled throughout the season to kind of get himself back. I mean, I can't necessarily say Nick Boyle was out for the season at any point, but he just wasn't back to his full self. So that's a big injury. That's a big key piece missing. Offensive line, Villanueva, the retired man, right? The recently retired man. Villanueva has to move from right tackle to left tackle, which he played better at, but has to move because Ronnie Stanley in the first game of the season, kind of re-aggravated that bad ankle of his. And now you got the offensive line. And I mean, that was a carousel the whole season, really. Ben Cleveland and Ben Powers were hurt throughout the season. Patrick McCarry stepped up at right tackle, but he was hurt. So it's like, the injuries were ridiculous, right? The injuries were just ridiculous. And that was just the offensive end, right? So that's running back. So what you talking about out for the season? That's running back, offensive line, and I mean practically tight end, but I ain't even gonna count tight end. But still you could say tight end. Then of course you got corner. I mean, Marcus Peters gets hurt. Marlon Humphrey gets hurt later on in the season. Tavon Young, he got banged up a little bit. He played more this season than he usually had in the past because he had always had injury issues. But this season, he finally got a chance to show up, and I think he really played well. Hate to see him go from a depth perspective, I think, personally. But we'll talk a little more about that here in a minute. But for me, man, like, just the injuries everywhere. Defensive line with Derek Wolfe, right? Calais Campbell got hurt, within the season too. I don't want to really talk about, kind of injuries that didn't necessarily linger, but like, Derek Wolfe is out for the season. In the linebacking core, LJ Fort is out for the season, which forced Patrick Queen to move to a position where he wasn't really comfortable in being the Mike linebacker, right? So, that kind of messed with the defense a little bit too. And then, of course, safety, Deshaun Elliott got hurt later on in the season. He was gone for the year for a nice little bit of games, especially that last stretch. So, I mean, that's corner, linebacker, defensive line. Like, there were injuries, significant injuries at every position except for wide receiver. Like, wide receiver was the only thing that was kind of standing tall at the end of the season, it felt like. And, like, for me, when I look at the Ravens season in review, I think as a fan and a passionate fan at that, you can't help but be a little frustrated. I'm not going to lie to you. You can't help but be a little bit frustrated with how the season went because, and I forgot the mentioned man, right? The mentioned man on the graphic is Lamar Jackson, right? So you got Lamar Jackson. He's hurt too. And that was, I think, the final nail in the coffin because although the Ravens were in practically every game they played this season. When Lamar Jackson got hurt, I think that's what ended the season essentially, right? When he sprained his ankle against the Browns, the second time they played the Browns, that's when the season kind of, I think, took a downturn. Now, albeit, I give the Ravens credit for this, they played their butts off throughout that stretch, right? Throughout that stretch, they were in every game. They just couldn't get the win, and I think that's why, for me, my biggest thing is with Tyler Huntley, he was good, but they just couldn't finish the games. If they could finish the games, I think we might be having a whole nother conversation. And also, I think if Lamar could have gotten healthy, I know sprained ankles linger too. If Lamar could have gotten healthy, you never know. The Ravens could have made some noise in the playoffs, because I think we forget too, because everybody wants to sit and credit the Bengals. And, with all due respect to the Bengals, something disrespectful about to come out, right? With all due respect to the Bengals, they did have a weak run throughout the playoffs, right? Joe Burrow had 4 TDs and 2 picks. Well, that was his playoff run. And we want to credit them for, I guess, overachieving, right? Which is fine, completely fine, right? But I mean, when you think about the Bengals' schedule in the playoffs, of course they started out with the Titans, who were hobbled. They started out with the Titans, who were hobbled, and they started out with the Raiders and the Titans. The Raiders, the Raiders have always been up and down, and I was surprised that they got to the playoffs with everything they went through. The Raiders have always been up and down, and I think that's just how the Raiders are, right? They up and down. Let's be honest. They just going. They just one of them type of teams, man. They are up and down. So the Raiders have always been up and down. Then of course, you got the Titans. The Titans were still hurt up. Derrick Henry was not ready to play that game, right? Derrick Henry was not ready to play that game. And then of course you got the Chiefs, which they just completely collapsed in the second half. And the Rams almost did in the Super Bowl and gifted the Bengals a Super Bowl, but I'm glad that they didn't. Overall, on the season, I'm disappointed, right? Because who wants to not make the playoffs, right? Especially in a season. This season was so any given Sunday, and I think the Ravens proved that, just like some of these other teams did with the Jags. We watched the Jags beat. Who did the Jets beat the Bengals? The Jags beat the Bills, right? And then the Jags knocked the Colts out of the playoffs at the end of the season, right? So it's like, and the Ravens were playing with everybody, every top seed in the NFC. They were playing with them. They played with the Rams. They played with the Packers, right? The only games that they couldn't stay in was the Bengals, right? They just the corners at that point just couldn't match up, and even when they was healthy, they weren't matching up very well either. So for me, it was disappointing, but you almost gotta kind of be proud of the team in a way, because it's like, with all they went through to be in all those games, and of course, if you literally flip a coin, right, and the game goes the other way, then and some of them really could have came down to a coin flip if John Harbaugh went to overtime. But then again, somebody once told me that history is written by the winners, so of course, losing those games makes it feel a little bit different than, of course it would if you won those games. But overall, I think I'm disappointed. I can't help but be a little bit disappointed, but at the same time, I got to give them a little bit of credit, right? I got to give them a little bit of credit, because this is the team that through, it felt like by hook or by crook was going to somehow win these games. And I don't know how they didn't, but let's be honest, they didn't, right? But at the same time, the Ravens really showed a lot of heart this season and showed a lot more potential than I think a lot of people gonna give them credit for. A lot of people, like, even when with the crazy amount of injuries, was thinking that the Ravens were going to win all of these games. I was expecting them maybe to like pull an upset against the Rams or maybe the Packers or something like that, and like put together a couple of games. Like I have faith in the Ravens to win games even when their backs against the wall. But you talking about back against the wall, there's no comparison for what the Ravens went through, and for them to be right in the playoff hunt at the end of the season, of course, needing a little bit of help, that's how that goes too. But couldn't get that help and ended up sitting at home for the playoffs. But I mean, I always felt like if the Ravens could make the playoffs, they could have made some noise in the playoffs, just because the league was just, I mean, they talk about every given Sunday, any given Sunday a lot, right? They talk about any given Sunday a lot. But this season, for a fact, was any given Sunday. For the first time, I feel like in a very long time. Like, for the first time in a very long time, you couldn't really count anybody out. You really didn't know what was going to happen at any given time. But I think this season showed a lot about the Ravens in terms of heart. I felt like, a lot of people were calling for John Harbaugh's head at the end of the season, especially, going for 2 and stuff like that. And I can understand the aggressive nature of John Harbaugh, especially in the situation that he was in for this particular season. You playing with a backup quarterback and backups everywhere you look, it feels like. And, like we said, if some of those plays go a little bit differently and they win some of those games, you never know what could have happened, I think. And even if Lamar could have got healthy with a couple of extra weeks of rest, or even, he missed the rest of the season after that Browns game, but, maybe getting in the playoffs for that wild card would have been, he would have been ready for that game. You never know. So, but at the end of the day, it was a disappointing season, but I think too, you got to be kind of proud of what the Ravens did, considering the circumstances, considering the injuries, considering what was put in front of them. You got to be decently okay with it, right? Let's talk about the coordinators real quick, and then we'll get to the most recent news. So a few weeks back, probably about a month now, I would think. Wink Martindale got fired. He has since been hired by the New York Giants as their defensive coordinator. And how to feel going into it, like, was the right coordinator? I guess that's the true question, right? Was the wrong coordinator fired, as it says on your screen? Was the wrong coordinator fired? To say that Wink didn't deserve to be fired, I think is a little bit of a questionable take. Because on one hand, I kind of agree, right? Leave it to me to say something that's questionable and then use it in my argument, right? But to say that Wink deserved to be fired is questionable, but at the same time, if you think about it, it might be right. Because yes, Wink gave us top 10, probably, I mean, you could probably even say top 5 defenses as long as they were healthy, right? This season, I could even chalk this season up and be like, oh, I mean, the best defensive coordinator in the world couldn't really coach this team, just because, like, there was guys out there that weren't even supposed to be out there yet, or, weren't ready for that moment. So really, the defense at the end of the season, I felt like stepped up. I really do. I feel like the defense truly stepped up when it came down to it. And I felt like it was the offense that really fell flat a little bit. I think the offense was kind of what fell flat a little bit when it came to the end of the season and finishing games. But let's take it back, down memory lane a little bit to some of the losses that Lamar Jackson did experience, especially in his career, to where the Ravens have had opportunities to come back in those games, right? The Ravens have had plenty of opportunities to come back. And that's where that whole narrative of Lamar can't beat the Chiefs, Lamar can't come from behind, this, that, and the third, right? Take it back to like Lamar's first playoff game. His first playoff game, and even that Chiefs game, I keep forgetting about that. That Chiefs game before that, right? He had a chance to win that game, and then the Ravens defense, which they put all the money into, couldn't get a stop. Then on top of that, you go to the playoffs, right? Yes, the offense started slow. Should they have started slow? Probably not, but they did. Okay. You got a rookie quarterback. making his first playoff start, and they're coming after him. And plus, he played this team before, right? The Ravens rallied to a comeback. The defense just couldn't get that last stop for the Ravens to take the lead / tie the game. And that's happened time and time again. I feel like every Chiefs game has been like that. Every Chiefs game, you couldn't get that final stop that you needed, right? Even, I'm trying to think, the Bills playoff game was different. The Titans playoff game, that first one was different too. But I felt like the play calling was kind of weird in those games. But a lot of those losses that Lamar took, especially in the regular season, were due to the defense not being able to get stops. So was Wink justified in being fired or parting ways, or however you want to say, whatever the vernacular you want to use is? Yes, I would say, especially if you're trying to like instill a different defensive scheme. Wink is live and die by the blitz. I'm gonna live by the blitz. I'm gonna die by the blitz. Right? Whether my guys can cover on the back end or not. It might be me, you, him, and them out there, right? like for real though. Like it might be, you don't know who. Wink is gonna blitz. Wink, this man right here, this man on your screen, Wink is going to blitz. Wink is going to blitz. Like, I'm just gonna let y'all know, Wink gonna blitz. Wink does not care. He gonna blitz. So my thought process is, with Wink, I feel like he was almost too aggressive for the defense that he was calling. For the personnel, I should say. He was too aggressive. For that type of personnel, he was too aggressive, considering who he had on the roster, right? Considering who he had on the roster, it was just it wasn't the perfect storm for Wink. Now we've seen what Greg Roman can do, right? We've seen it, right? Has Greg Roman hit a ceiling? I think you could possibly say he has. And I think that's why the wrong coordinator might have got fired, because I think we want to see some of these other guys get opportunities. Let's talk about the news. Give me 5 seconds. 5 seconds. You got to count to 5, right? Count to 5 with me. Give me 5 seconds to talk about this news. You got Villanova. I'm going to give you a second to just think about it for a minute. Villanueva retires, Tavon Young release, and Myles Boykin potentially getting traded. All right, so it wasn't the music I was going for when I decided to take a quick break. I was thinking a little bit more something, a little bit more hip, but whatever. So first off, with Villanueva, I'm pretty sure Villanueva was contemplating retiring before the season, before the Ravens even signed him. So I'm not surprised that he retired. He was under a lot of pressure and a lot of scrutiny, especially after Ronnie Stanley got hurt, and even before that, I mean, him at right tackle just won't it. So with Villanueva retiring, I mean, I think he was just ready to retire. What was it, 7 years in the NFL? I think it was. Yeah, 7 years. Of course, he spent most of them with the Steelers, unfortunately. But for me, I feel like Villanueva to me, he just wasn't a good fit. He wasn't at all. Like, Villanueva was not a good fit at all for what the Ravens needed. I think he was just almost like too old and too slow. And the Ravens, of course, had a lot of times where they had to spread the ball around a little bit more too this season. So that, I think that goes hand in hand. It's gonna sound a little disrespectful, but I don't want to say he won't be missed. But I might as well say he won't be missed. Because I think the Ravens were probably going to, if not move forward from him, in some form or fashion, they were going to move forward from him. So with Villanueva, it's he probably gonna get much healthier after retiring. That's usually how that goes. I won't be surprised if I see a transformation Tuesday from Villanueva sometime soon. But for me, personally, I ain't gonna necessarily miss Villanueva, even though I think he did play pretty well at left tackle. Give the man a little bit of credit. Now, before we get into the potential rumor of Boykin potentially being traded, let's jump over to Tavon Young on the other side of the ball. Tavon Young being released by the Ravens. I'm sure a lot of Ravens fans are probably thinking, finally, because Tavon Young has struggled with injuries since, I think it was since his second year. No, I'm pretty sure he was out for the year, his first year, and then he struggled with injuries ever since then. He played, the times he played, he showed great potential, but he could just never stay on the field. Now, what surprises me about Tavon Young, knowing his injury history, the Ravens still continue to have, and I quote, big trust in Tavon Young. And it was a little surprising to me. I was a little surprised that they had so much trust in Tavon Young, because they extended him I think it was after he tore his ACL, they extended him. I'm pretty sure they've extended him twice. So the amount of trust they got in Tavon Young, I think, is kind of crazy when you think about his injury history. But as opposite as this is going to sound, I would have kept him. Now, I would have probably tried to sign him for a lesser deal, but the Ravens right now, especially after the season that we just saw, need corner depth pretty bad. They need more corners. Marcus Peters coming back off of ACL. Marlon Humphrey coming back off torn bicep, I think it was. Jimmy Smith is up and down and probably won't even re-sign. He might even retire himself, right? I love Jimmy Smith, but Jimmy Smith has regressed a little bit just because of his age. So they kind of need the depth at corner. And if you don't put Tavon Young, I think, in a position to get hurt, I just don't think his body is necessarily built for every week in the NFL as a starting cornerback, especially a starting slot. I think they should have kept him for depth more than anything. That kind of surprised me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was a little surprised because they kept him kind of by hook or by crook, however they could. But it was no more. And then, of course, Myles Boykin, the potential of him getting traded. I'll never understand. And maybe it's because I don't know enough about the situation. Of course, I'm not in the inside. I don't see the man at practice, but I have heard plenty of times that Myles Boykin is a great blocker. I'm surprised they haven't tried to bulk him up and put him at tight end, kind of do the Darren Waller treatment, because I wouldn't be surprised if somebody signs Myles Boykin and he either becomes a really good receiver, because I think he's shown flashes, but the Ravens can't develop wide receivers, as we obviously see, or he becomes a good tight end somewhere, right? Somebody bulks him up and they make him a pretty decent, tight end. I don't think it's necessarily his hands that are the problem. I think sometimes it's his ability to get open, but I don't think his hands are necessarily the problem. I think he probably has a better catch rate, catch to drop ratio than probably Hollywood does at times. So for me, I'm a little surprised that they didn't kind of, and we all know the Ravens love projects. Project Pat, right? Like who probably won't re-sign either. But the Ravens love their little projects, right? They let Patrick Ricard, a 300-pound human being, play defensive tackle and fullback, and sometimes in the same game. So they love projects. So I'm a little surprised that they don't try a little bit more on the offensive end. But the one thing about the Ravens that kind of maybe I'm just coming to this realization now is the Ravens have always struggled to develop the offensive side of the ball, especially when it comes to receivers. So it's not surprising necessarily to me that they don't feel like maybe possibly that they wouldn't be able to turn a wide receiver into a good, capable tight end. So honestly, I wish they try it. I really do. I wish they try it because I think with Boykin being as young as he is, you don't really got anything to lose, right? You don't have anything to lose. He's not the fastest guy in the world anyway. So, why not lean into that? And maybe they will. Maybe this is just a rumor and that's just where we are, right? Maybe that's what this is. But at the end of the day, I would love to see Boykin stay and kind of just add to the weapons because, of course, Nick Bull is more of a blocking tight end than he is a catching tight end, even though he can catch. I will give him the credit that he deserves. He can catch. But given that significant knee injury he had 2 years ago, you also got to remember, you don't know what his future looks like either. So for me, overall in terms of the whole thing, season in review, disappointed but not too disappointed, right? It's not, for me, this season was not like losing in the first round of the playoffs, right? I don't really want to go through this type of season again. This was like very 2015-ish, right? Where the entire squad got injured. But for me, I don't think this is as bad as losing in the playoffs in the first round, right? I don't think this is as bad as having expectations and losing before you should have. At the end of the day, everybody kind of counted the Ravens out because, of all the injuries that they had sustained, especially when Lamar Jackson got hurt and it felt like he wasn't going to be able to get back. I think everybody kind of knew the writing was on the wall. It's kind of a wash, especially considering they're not finishing games like they maybe would with Lamar Jackson in the game. When it comes to the news and the rumors of everything, I know I'm going out of order, but when it comes to the news and the rumors of everything, I don't think anything really surprised me. Tavon a little bit maybe. Other than that, I don't think anything really surprised me. And then was the wrong coordinator fired? That's still up in the air for me. But as always, hope you guys enjoyed the pilot episode of Flock Nation Speaks. Until next time, I'll be back with probably a little bit of Sixers content. I also want to give you a good Raven show week after week. So DJ signing off. Until next time, this has been Flock